For 8 years, Amaka had learned the language of silence the way some people learn prayer, quietly, faithfully, and with the hope that it would eventually answer her back. Her marriage to Kenechukwu had once been loud with laughter and careless promises, but now it moved like a tired old radio playing in another room. Always on, rarely listened to. Their small flat still looked like a family home, neatly folded laundry, a child's toy car abandoned under the sofa, faint crayon marks on the wall, but inside it lived a tension that had learned to dress itself as normal. Their 3-year-old son, Chibuzo, was the glue everyone admired, the proof people pointed to when they said, "At least they have a child." What they didn't see was how Amaka carried that child and the marriage at the same time, like a woman balancing 2 buckets on her head, praying neither would spill. Keen had changed in small ways first, the kind that were easy to explain away if you loved someone enough. He came home later, blamed traffic, blamed work, blamed Lagos itself, as if the city had personally conspired against their marriage. When Amaka asked questions, he sighed loudly, like a man exhausted by an unreasonable woman. "Can I rest?" he would snap. "Is it a crime to be tired?" And sometimes, to soften the blow, he would smile and lift Chibuzo into his arms, turning fatherhood into a shield. Amaka noticed how arguments ended the moment their son entered the room, how Keen suddenly became gentle then. As if the child were a witness, he feared more than his wife. At night, when the house was quiet except for Chibuzo's soft breathing, Amaka lay awake replaying conversations in her head, wondering when love had become something she had to defend. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself all marriages had seasons. Still, a small voice whispered that something had shifted, that her husband was no longer standing beside her, but somewhere else entirely, looking back only when it suited him. She laughed once at the thought, a short, bitter sound, because the idea that her marriage could collapse so quietly felt almost insulting. If it was going to break, shouldn't it at least make noise? Lillian arrived with 1 suitcase, and a smile too bright for a woman who claimed she was only staying for a while. She was Amaka's stepsister, younger, freer, and carrying herself with the careless confidence of someone who had never been the responsible one. Keen welcomed her warmly, too warmly Amaka noticed, as he lifted her suitcase and joked about how the house was finally going to have life again. Amaka smiled politely, the way women do when their instincts whisper warnings, but politeness tells them to shut up. Chibuzo ran to Lillian almost immediately, drawn by her exaggerated laughter and playful voice, and everyone laughed, as if this was proof of her goodness. "Children can sense kind people," Keen said, glancing at Amaka like that settled something. The first argument happened over something small, space. Lillian rearranged the sitting room, claiming it flowed better that way. Amaka mentioned it calmly. Keen laughed. "You're upset over furniture?" he asked, disbelief dripping from his voice. "She's just helping." Helping became cooking meals without asking, disciplining Chibuzo without permission, and commenting on Amaka's routines like a guest who had overstayed long enough to feel entitled. When Amaka finally spoke up, Keen accused her of being ungrateful. "Do you know how many women would appreciate this kind of help?" he asked sharply. The question landed like an insult, wearing the mask of logic. That night, Amaka lay beside Keen, listening to him type on his phone with his back turned. She joked lightly, asking if he was chatting with the president. He didn't laugh. "You overthink too much," he said instead. The words stung because they were familiar, his favorite way of ending conversations. Across the room, Lillian's laughter floated in from the guest room as she spoke on her own phone. Amaka closed her eyes, telling herself she was tired, telling herself she was jealous for no reason, telling herself lies because the truth felt too heavy to hold. It didn't take long for the house to divide itself quietly. Lillian occupied space with ease. Amaka shrank to accommodate her. When Amaka corrected Chibuzo gently, Lillian would contradict her playfully, turning discipline into a joke. "Let him be a child," she would say, smiling at Keen. And Keen would nod, as though Amaka were some overly strict schoolteacher instead of the boy's mother. One afternoon, when Amaka confronted him, the argument escalated faster than she expected. "You're making problems where there are none," Keen snapped. "Why are you competing with your own sister?" The word competing hung in the air, absurd and painful at the same time. Voices rose that evening, sharp enough to slice through the walls. Chibuzo stood in the doorway, confused, clutching his toy car. Amaka lowered her voice immediately, reaching for him. But Keen didn't stop. "You're always complaining," he said. "Always suspicious. You're turning this house into a battlefield." The irony nearly made Amaka laugh. She gathered their son into her arms, whispering soothing nonsense, while Keen stormed out of the room like a man wronged. Later, he accused her of using the child to manipulate him. Amaka stared at him in disbelief, wondering when motherhood had become a weapon in her husband's mouth. That night, Amaka sang Chibuzo to sleep, her voice soft, her heart heavy. She thought of how easily Keen dismissed her fears, how quickly he defended Lillian, how often he made her feel like the unreasonable one. Somewhere deep inside, anger began to replace confusion, not loud anger, but the quiet kind that takes notes. She didn't know it yet, but this was the night she stopped asking herself if she was crazy and started watching carefully instead. Amaka confronted Lillian privately the next morning, choosing calm over chaos. She spoke about boundaries, about respect, about the strange atmosphere in the house. Lillian listened with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're reading too much into things," she said lightly. "I'm only trying to help. Maybe you're just overwhelmed." The word overwhelmed landed like a diagnosis. When Amaka mentioned how close she seemed to Keen, Lillian laughed outright. "You're my sister," she said. "Why would you think like that?" But her tone held something else, confidence, maybe, or amusement. By evening, Keen was furious. Lillian had told him everything, twisted just enough to make Amaka sound unstable. "Why are you attacking her?" he demanded. "Do you want everyone to leave this house because of your insecurities?" The argument exploded, sharp and relentless. Amaka reminded him of loyalty, of marriage, of respect. Keen accused her of suffocating him. "You weren't like this before," he said cruelly. "Motherhood has changed you." The words burned because they carried truth and blame in equal measure. After he left the room, Amaka sat on the bed, staring at nothing, wondering how easily her place had been questioned in her own home. Chibuzo climbed onto her lap, patting her face with small hands, asking innocent questions that had no answers. She smiled for him, because mothers learn to smile through storms, but inside her, something hardened. Love, she realized, could make you blind, but it could also sharpen your sight when you finally decided to open your eyes. The fight that changed everything began with a simple question. Amaka asked Keen where he had been the night before. He exploded. His voice rose, accusations spilling out faster than she could respond. "I'm tired of explaining myself," he shouted. "You act like a victim all the time." Lillian appeared at the doorway, pretending to calm him, her hand lingering on his arm. Amaka pointed it out. Keen snapped back, calling her paranoid. The argument grew teeth, old sacrifices dragged out, past mistakes weaponized, words thrown with the intention to wound. Chibuzo began to cry. Amaka begged Keen to lower his voice. He didn't. "You're teaching him to fear me," he accused. The accusation was so unfair, it almost felt funny in a cruel way, like blaming the mirror for the crack in your face. When Keen finally stormed out of the house, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, Amaka stood shaking, holding her son close, wondering how a man could leave so easily when his child was crying for him. That night, after Chibuzo slept, Amaka sat alone in the sitting room, surrounded by a life that suddenly felt borrowed. She replayed Keen's words, Lillian's smiles, the way everyone seemed so sure she was the problem. And for the first time, instead of breaking down, she laughed softly at herself, at the absurdity of loving someone who treated her like an inconvenience. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew one thing with frightening clarity. Whatever storm was approaching, she would not face it unprepared. The first time Keen's family truly stepped into the matter, Amaka knew the ground beneath her marriage had shifted. His mother arrived unannounced one afternoon, her presence heavy with judgment before she even sat down. She greeted Chibuzo warmly, lifting him with practiced affection, then turned to Amaka with a smile that did not ask permission. The conversation began politely, questions about food, about work, about the child. But it quickly drifted into accusation, disguised as concern. "Marriage needs peace," she said pointedly. "A woman must know how to keep her home calm." Amaka listened, hands folded, realizing too late that this was not a visit, but a verdict. When Amaka tried to explain the tension, the boundaries crossed. The way her voice had been erased in her own home, Keen interrupted sharply. "You see," he said to his mother, "she always makes everything sound dramatic." The argument ignited instantly. Amaka reminded him of nights she slept alone, of decisions he made without her, of how Lillian had become too comfortable. His mother waved it off. "If another woman is helping you raise your child, you should be grateful," she said. The sentence landed like a slap, sharp and humiliating. Amaka laughed once, a sound more shocked than amused, because she had not known gratitude could be demanded for being replaced. The disagreement ended without resolution, only exhaustion. That night, Keen accused Amaka of embarrassing him before his family. She replied quietly that he had embarrassed their marriage long before that day. He slept in the sitting room. Amaka lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing that when elders choose sides, they do not listen for truth, they listen for comfort. And comfort, she saw clearly now, had chosen Keen. The confirmation Amaka never wanted arrived by accident. She was returning from the bathroom late one night when she heard raised voices in the kitchen, Keen's and Lillian's. She paused, instinctively, not out of suspicion but habit. Their argument was sharp, hurried, stripped of caution. Lillian complained about waiting, about pretending, about how much longer she had to act small in a house that already felt like hers. Keen hushed her, reminding her to be patient, to think of the timing, to remember the child. The word child froze Amaka in place. Not our son, not Chibuzo, just a child, an obstacle spoken of, not a person loved. Amaka stepped into the light deliberately, her presence cutting the conversation short. Silence fell too fast. She asked what they were discussing. Keen answered too quickly, claiming it was nothing. Lillian avoided her eyes. Amaka pressed gently, calmly, her voice steady in a way that unsettled him. That was when Keen lost his temper. "You spy now," he shouted. "Is that what you've become?" The accusation sparked another argument, fiercer than before. Amaka asked him directly if there was something between him and Lillian. He denied it without hesitation, his voice loud, defensive, almost rehearsed. Later, he accused her of poisoning the atmosphere of the house, of creating tension their son could feel. "You're the problem," he said flatly. "You've changed." The irony sat bitter on Amaka's tongue. She wanted to ask him when exactly he thought she should have remained the same, after childbirth, after neglect, after being slowly erased, but she said nothing. Silence, she was learning, made people careless. And careless people eventually expose themselves. The announcement came without ceremony. Keen sat across from Amaka one evening, his face strangely calm, as though he had rehearsed the moment in front of a mirror. "I want a divorce," he said. No anger. No apology. Just a statement delivered like a business decision. Amaka stared at him, waiting for more, for explanation, for guilt, for hesitation. But none came. She asked about their son. He shrugged. "We'll work that out," he said dismissively. The casualness of it stunned her more than the words themselves. When Amaka pressed for the truth, for the real reason, the argument erupted. He accused her of suffocating him, of turning marriage into obligation instead of partnership. She reminded him of loyalty, of vows, of the child sleeping in the next room. Finally, tired of pretending, he said it. "I'm in love with Lillian." The room seemed to tilt. Amaka laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, then cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way that felt like mourning. Keen stood firm, cold even, insisting love was not planned and that she should be mature enough to accept it. That night, Amaka packed nothing. She did not scream. She did not beg. She sat beside her sleeping son, watching his chest rise and fall, understanding that her life had just divided itself into before and after. And in that quiet, Something else settled inside her. Not hope, not despair, but clarity. The days that followed were unbearable in their normality. Lillian stopped pretending. She moved through the house with ease, buying groceries, organizing shelves, speaking to Chibuzzo with a confidence that felt deliberate. She referred to the future casually, schools, routines, plans, always using we. Amaka confronted her openly one afternoon, her voice trembling with controlled fury. "Do not involve my child in your fantasies," she warned. Lillian smiled sadly, as if pitying her. "You can't stop what's already happening," she replied. Keen backed Lillian publicly. He told Amaka to stop causing scenes, to think about their son's emotional health. The argument escalated into shouting, raw and humiliating. Amaka accused him of replacing her, before she had even left. He accused her of bitterness. Chibuzzo watched from the doorway again, confusion etched across his small face. That night, Amaka cried quietly in the bathroom, anger burning hotter than grief. She realized then that staying silent would no longer protect her. The fight was no longer just about marriage, it was about motherhood, dignity, and survival. The first time Keen mentioned custody, he did it casually, almost lazily, as though he were commenting on the weather. They were standing in the kitchen, the evening quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and Chibuzzo's cartoon playing faintly from the bedroom. "We'll have to think seriously about what's best for the child," Keen said, not looking at Amaka. The words slid into the room like a knife disguised as conversation. Amaka froze, then slowly turned to face him. She asked him what he meant. He shrugged, a faint smile touching his lips. "I mean stability," he said. "A calm home. Not constant tension." The implication was unmistakable and deliberate. Amaka's voice rose for the first time in days, sharp with disbelief. She reminded him that she had been the one waking at dawn, preparing meals, attending doctor visits, soothing night terrors, holding their son together while Keen slowly drifted away. Keen listened with crossed arms, unimpressed. "Being emotional doesn't make you a good parent," he replied coldly. "Sometimes love isn't enough." The sentence ignited something dangerous. Amaka accused him of using their child as leverage, of suddenly remembering fatherhood only when it suited his plans. He snapped back, saying courts preferred calm women, reasonable women, not ones who cried and questioned everything. The argument escalated, voices colliding, years of resentment spilling out like broken glass. Keen went further. He mentioned lawyers, papers, options. He spoke of shared custody as though it were charity, not a right. Amaka laughed bitterly, the sound cracking under the weight of rage and hurt. "You were never around," she said. "Now you want to divide him like property?" He accused her of dramatizing, of trying to guilt him. She accused him of betrayal, not just as a husband, but as a father. When the argument finally burned itself out, silence followed, heavy, suffocating. That night, after putting Chibuzzo to bed, Amaka sat alone in the living room, her heart pounding not with fear anymore, but calculation. For the first time since the storm began, she stopped asking why this was happening and started asking what she knew. And in that shift, quiet but powerful, Amaka began to understand that Keen's confidence was built on a lie he didn't even realize he believed. Amaka's silence unsettled the house more than her arguments ever had. She stopped questioning Keen's movements, stopped reacting to Lillian's comments, stopped defending herself when passive remarks were thrown her way. Instead, she focused on routines, waking early, preparing Chibuzzo for daycare, humming softly as she tied his shoes, smiling when he spoke. To anyone watching, it looked like surrender. Keen mistook it for weakness. He grew louder, more confident, discussing plans openly, treating the house like a place he had already left. The irony was almost humorous to Amaka, how people grew careless when they believed they had won. Lillian, emboldened by the silence, became increasingly disrespectful. She corrected Amaka openly, made jokes about single motherhood masked as concern, and once casually suggested changing Chibuzzo's bedtime routine because children adjust better with firm authority. Amaka stared at her, amused by the audacity, then simply nodded. This confused Lillian far more than confrontation ever could. Keen, observing from the sidelines, praised Lillian's maturity, claiming Amaka could learn from her calmness. Amaka smiled politely, wondering when calm had become synonymous with intrusion. That night, alone in her room, Amaka wrote things down, not emotions, not accusations, but facts. Dates, names, documents she remembered signing years ago without question. Contributions she made quietly while Keen took credit loudly. She was no longer reacting. She was preparing. And preparation, she knew, was the most dangerous form of patience. The truth about power is that it often hides in places people stop looking. Amaka spent days revisiting old emails, company registration documents, property agreements, and bank alerts she had once skimmed absent-mindedly. Each discovery felt surreal. The house they lived in registered under her name for convenience. The business Keen boasted about to friends, hers legally. Even the education savings account for Chibuzzo bore her sole signature. She laughed quietly at the realization, a short, breathy sound, because Keen had spent years calling her dependent while leaning comfortably on her foundation. As she pieced everything together, memories returned with new meaning. Her late father's insistence on proper documentation. His warnings delivered casually over evening meals. "Love is sweet," he once said, "but wisdom keeps the lights on." She finally understood what he meant. The clarity did not erase the pain, but it anchored her. For the first time since the chaos began, Amaka slept soundly, her mind no longer racing with fear. Meanwhile, Keen and Lillian planned openly. Discussions about moving timelines, future arrangements, even custody schedules floated around as if Amaka were no longer part of the room. Amaka listened quietly, noting everything. She realized then that people who believe you are defeated reveal more than they should. And she intended to let them keep talking. The invitation to the family dinner arrived wrapped in politeness, but carried the weight of strategy. Keen presented it to Amaka like a generous offer. His tone careful, measured, as though he were negotiating a ceasefire rather than setting a stage. He spoke of dignity, of ending things properly, of showing maturity for the sake of their son. Amaka listened without interruption, studying his face, noting how his eyes never quite met hers when he spoke. Lillian hovered nearby, pretending not to listen while clearly listening to everything. When Amaka agreed almost immediately, the room went quiet. Keen blinked in surprise. Lillian's smile stiffened. They had expected resistance, perhaps tears, maybe another argument. They did not expect calm acceptance. Planning for the dinner became a subtle battlefield. Seating arrangements were discussed like power moves. Lillian suggested she sit beside Keen to avoid confusion. Amaka nodded, as if it didn't matter. Keen's mother called repeatedly, emphasizing respect, family image, and the importance of not embarrassing anyone. Each call carried an unspoken warning. Know your place. Amaka responded politely, her voice soft, her words agreeable. When she hung up, she wrote notes instead. Who said what? Who assumed what? Who believed she had already lost? The quiet preparation amused her in a bitter way. Everyone thought the story was finished. No one realized the final chapter hadn't been written yet. The night before the dinner, Amaka sat on the floor of her room with a small pile of documents spread around her like puzzle pieces. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She simply organized. Each paper felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because of what they represented. Years of silence. Years of contribution dismissed. She folded everything neatly and placed it back in her bag. When she lay beside Chibuzzo later, listening to his steady breathing, she whispered a promise she fully intended to keep. Tomorrow, nobody will rewrite our story again. The dining room looked perfect, almost insultingly so. Plates gleamed. Chairs were arranged with deliberate symmetry. The family arrived dressed in polite smiles and restrained judgment. Lillian entered confidently beside Keen, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture too familiar to be accidental. Amaka noticed everything. She said nothing. Elders settled into their seats, glancing at her with curiosity and thinly veiled pity. Someone commented on how composed she looked. Another murmured that she was handling things well. Amaka smiled gently, wondering how people mistook silence for weakness so easily. Conversation flowed awkwardly at first: food, work, the child. Chibuzo was ushered away early, supposedly to spare him adult matters. Amaka watched him leave, her jaw tightening. The moment he was gone, the room shifted. Lillian laughed louder, inserting herself into stories that did not include her. Keen spoke confidently, as though already absolved. His mother praised patience, making pointed remarks about women who knew when to step aside. Amaka responded only when directly addressed, her tone respectful, her posture relaxed. The restraint unsettled them more than tears ever could have. As the meal progressed, tension thickened. Lillian mentioned future arrangements casually, referring to Keen's house as our home. Keen did not correct her. Amaka finally lifted her gaze, slow and deliberate. The silence that followed felt intentional. Before assumptions turn into decisions, she said calmly, clarity is necessary. Keen stiffened. His mother frowned. Someone laughed nervously. The table sensed a shift, but didn't yet understand its direction. Amaka did not raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She asked questions. About finances. About ownership. About sacrifices made quietly and credited loudly. Keen tried to interrupt, irritation bleeding into his tone. Why are we doing this now? He demanded. Amaka looked at him steadily. Because decisions are being made, she replied, and truth should be present when they are. The elders leaned forward. The room grew tense. Lillian shifted uncomfortably, her confidence slipping for the first time. When Amaka placed the documents on the table, the air changed. Papers were examined. Names were read. Dates confirmed. Murmurs spread like fire through dry grass. Keen denied at first, loudly, angrily, accusing Amaka of manipulation. She responded with facts only. Each rebuttal weakened him further. Lillian tried to speak, but the elders silenced her sharply. The authority she thought she had dissolved instantly. By the time Keen realized what was happening, it was too late. The narrative he controlled for years was unraveling in public, thread by thread. Amaka sat calmly amid the chaos, her silence louder than any accusation. This dinner was no longer about peace. It was about reckoning. The dining table stopped being a table and became a witness stand. It happened in slow motion. An uncle adjusted his glasses and reread Amaka's name on the documents. An auntie's mouth fell open halfway, like she forgot how to close it. And Keen's mother blinked so many times it looked like her eyelashes were trying to escape the room. Someone cleared their throat, one of those dramatic elder coughs that means, we are about to be serious now. And then the questions began. Calm questions, which are always more dangerous than angry ones. So this house is under Amaka. These shares are also under Amaka. And this account for Chibuzo's school. Only Amaka can sign. Keen tried to laugh, a sharp, fake laugh that sounded like a spoon scraping a metal plate. You people don't understand, he said quickly. It was just arrangement. For convenience. But the room had already started leaning away from him, the way a crowd leans away from a man who smells like lies. Keen's voice rose as he realized convenience wasn't convincing anyone. He accused Amaka of planning this embarrassment, of being petty, of turning family into court. Amaka didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her voice. She answered the elders, not him, as though Keen was a background noise she had finally learned to ignore. That calmness irritated him more than insult would have. Tell them, he snapped at her. Tell them how you've been acting. Tell them you've been quiet like a snake. One elder lifted a hand, silencing him without touching him. Authority in its purest form. Young man, the elder said, a snake does not announce itself. But truth does not need announcement either. It stands. Keen looked around, searching for support, and found none, not even from the aunties who used to defend him out of habit. The habit had expired. Lillian tried to rescue the moment with tears and soft speech. Please, everybody, she pleaded, this is still family. Let us not make it worse. But her voice sounded small now, because everyone could hear the desperation behind it. Amaka finally turned to her and asked one question, quiet and clean. When did you start calling my husband yours? The room went still. Lillian stammered. Keen jumped in angrily, claiming Amaka was twisting things, that love just happened, that Amaka was too cold, too suspicious. An uncle tapped the papers again and asked Keen, "So you wanted to divorce her, take her home, and still take her son's future with it?" Keen opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time all night, silence slapped him harder than words. After the elders dismissed the food and called for family-only discussion, the room became even tighter, fewer plates, fewer distractions, nowhere for Keen to hide behind small talk. He tried to pull Lillian aside, whispering urgently, but she jerked her arm away as if his touch suddenly burned. "So you lied to me too," she hissed. "You told me everything was yours. You told me once she signs, we're free." Keen's face hardened. "Lower your voice," he warned, glancing at the elders. Lillian laughed, a bitter laugh that cracked like dry wood. "Ah, so now you care about shame? When you were pushing her out, you didn't care about shame." That sentence landed in the room like a dropped pot. Several heads turned sharply. Keen's mother's eyes widened, not just with shock, but with the terrifying realization that her son's mess had grown teeth. Keen snapped back, blaming Lillian for rushing him, for pressuring him, for making him impatient. Lillian's anger exploded. She accused him of using her, of promising her a life he couldn't provide, of dragging her into a plan, and then acting innocent when the plan met daylight. Their argument became messy, personal, and loud, the kind of fight lovers have when love was never solid enough to carry truth. Amaka sat quietly, hands folded, watching the performance with a strange calm. It almost amused her how quickly romance turned into blame once applause stopped. Keen pointed at Amaka like she was the enemy. Lillian pointed at Keen like he was the fraud. And the elders watched both of them like people watching children spill palm oil on a white wrapper, angry, disappointed, and tired. Then the elder who had been quiet the longest finally spoke, and his voice was low enough to force everyone to lean in. "This family will not be used as a market square," he said. "If you want to fight, fight outside. Here, we will speak truth." He asked Keen directly if he had been planning to remove Amaka from her own property. Keen tried to talk around it. The elder cut him off. "Yes or no?" Keen's throat worked. "I thought it was mine," he admitted finally, and it sounded ridiculous even to him. The elder nodded slowly, then turned to Lillian. "And you," he said, "you entered a home and wanted to sit on another woman's chair. Do you still want that chair now?" Lillian burst into tears, swearing she loved Keen, swearing she never meant harm. But the room had moved past tears. When people see the math of betrayal, crying cannot change the answer. By morning, the drama had turned into reality, the kind that comes with phone calls, screenshots, and elders sending messages that begin with "come and see me" and end with "don't joke with me." Keen woke up restless, pacing the sitting room, running his hands over his head like he could rearrange his thoughts into a better outcome. He tried to call Amaka into a private conversation, voice softened now, like a man switching tactics mid-game. "Let's not make this bigger than it is," he said. "We can settle it quietly." Amaka looked at him for a long moment, then replied, "You made it big when you brought my stepsister into my marriage. I'm only refusing to make it dirty." The calmness in her tone irritated him again, because it sounded like someone who had already accepted the end. Keen attempted apology, but it came in the shape of bargaining. He promised to handle Lillian, to restore peace, to be serious as a father. When he mentioned Chibuzo, his voice cracked dramatically, like he expected the child's name to act as a magic key. Amaka didn't melt. She asked him one question. "When you threatened custody, did you remember his bedtime stories? Did you remember his fever nights? Or did you only remember court?" Keen's face tightened. He tried anger. It didn't work. He tried guilt. It didn't work. Finally, he tried the truth he had avoided. "I made a mistake." Amaka nodded once. "Yes," she said simply. "And mistakes have consequences. There are some sentences that don't need poetry." That one didn't. Lillian appeared later, eyes swollen, attempting to speak to Amaka like they were still sisters. "Please," she begged, "don't destroy me." Amaka's response was quiet but firm. "I didn't." Build your lie. I can't maintain it. Lillian turned to Keen, demanding protection. Keen hesitated, because protecting Lillian now meant standing against the elders, against documents, against reality. That hesitation was loud. Lillian's face twisted, with shock and fury. So I ruined myself for you, she shouted. Keen snapped back. You ruined yourself because you wanted what wasn't yours. Their voices carried down the corridor, bitter and exposed. Amaka listened from her room, then closed the door gently, not because she was afraid, but because she was done hearing people argue over what they broke. The custody conversation happened in a neutral place, not at home, because home was no longer neutral. An elder arranged a meeting with a family mediator and Keen's uncle present, the kind of gathering where people speak slowly and choose words like they're handling hot soup. Amaka arrived with Chibuzo's daycare schedule, medical records, and a calmness that made everyone sit straighter. Keen arrived with emotion, long speeches about fatherhood, regret, and how he never meant for things to go this far. The mediator listened, then asked practical questions. Who drops him off? Who picks him up? Who pays? Who has been present? Keen's answers were full of sometimes, and I was busy, and busy is not a parenting plan. When Keen realized the discussion wasn't about pity, but structure, his frustration boiled over. He accused Amaka of trying to punish him by taking their son. Amaka corrected him immediately, her voice still calm, but sharper now. I'm not taking him, she said. I'm protecting his routine. A child is not a trophy you carry when you want sympathy. The room went quiet. The mediator nodded slowly, as though Amaka had finally said what everyone was afraid to say aloud. Keen tried to argue again, claiming Amaka was too hard, too controlled, too cold. One uncle sighed and said, Keen, you used to call her calm when you needed her. Now you call her cold because she refuses to cry for you. The irony sat on Keen's face like dust. By the end of the meeting, a plan was set. Keen would have structured visitation, not sudden appearances. He would contribute consistently, not occasionally. Amaka would remain the primary caregiver, because she already was. Keen tried one last emotional plea outside the room, lowering his voice like a man confessing. Amaka, please, he said. Don't let our son grow up hating me. Amaka looked at him steadily. Then don't give him reasons, she replied. It wasn't a curse. It was advice, too late, but still true. And for the first time, Keen understood that Amaka wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting to stabilize a child who didn't ask to be born into betrayal. Amaka chose a morning when the sky looked ordinary. No dramatic rain, no thunder. Just a regular Lagos day that would continue whether her heart was heavy or not. She packed quietly, not the whole house, only what mattered. Chibuzo's clothes, his favorite toy car, his small blanket that smelled like sleep. She moved like someone who had rehearsed peace. Keen watched her from the doorway, eyes red, trying to speak and failing. He attempted one last apology, but it came out tangled, full of if only and I didn't know. Amaka didn't argue. She had discovered that some conversations are simply circles people run in when they don't want to accept the straight road of consequence. At the gate, Keen finally broke into anger, the final desperate costume of a man who had lost control. He accused her of pride, of stubbornness, of listening to people instead of forgiving him. Amaka turned slowly, her expression calm, almost pitying. Keen, she said, for years you called me insecure when I sensed danger. Now you call me proud because I'm leaving it. He flinched as if slapped. She continued, not loudly, but clearly. I'm not leaving because I hate you. I'm leaving because I love my son enough not to raise him inside disrespect. Keen's mouth opened, then closed. He had no comeback for that. Some truths leave no space for argument. As Amaka walked away, holding Chibuzo's hand, the boy looked back once and waved innocently, not understanding the war behind the peace. Keen stood there frozen, watching them shrink into distance, his wife and child becoming a memory he could not negotiate with. Inside the house, Lillian's luggage sat half-packed, abandoned like a bad decision someone didn't want to claim. The elders' messages stopped coming. They had said what needed to be said. And the quiet that followed was not the quiet of love. It was the quiet of consequences finally settling. like dust after a door slams. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.